Sangye Chödrak Soki Chonam La Chanchu Patu Dani Kapsuchi Dagi Jinso Gi Pesanam Ki Chola Benshil Sangye Chupa Sho Sangye Chödrak Soki Chonam La Chanchu Patu Dani Kapsuchi Dagi Jinso Gi Pesanam Ki Tola Benchil Sangye Drupa Sho Sangye Chödrak Soki Chonam La Chanchu Patu Dan Kapsu Chi Dagi Jinso Gi Pesanam Ki Tola Benchil Sangye Drupa Sho Chom Den De Jambe Yang La Chak Se Lo Gangi Lo Chö Trim Ni Trim Ni Ta Nam Da Krab Se Loe Chin Ye Den Kun Ji Shi Si Shi Ni Ki Tu Ka Leg Bam Sim Gang Dak Si Pe Sen Ha Ma Ri Mun Dum Du Nyer Gi Si We Do Tso Kuna Bu Che Da Se Yan La Do Chu Yang Den So Do Ta Cha Do Nye Mo Ni Lo Le Ki Cha Do Do Se Ching Ma Rik Mun Se Do Nye Nyu Gu Che Nye Je Se Ren Dui Nam De Ne Da Shi Sa Chi Ta Sa Nyan Ten Lu Zo Gyal Se Tu We Ku Chu Da Chu Da Chu Ni Tre Da Klu Mu Se Jam Pe Yang La Du Tse Den Ke Ki Ken Ra Be Se Gi Da Klu Ti Mu Mun Pa Ram Sen Ne Ka Tan Ten She Shu Lu To Pa Yi Lo Je Pa Pe Na Wa Tsel Tu Sa.
We are studying the entry toward the state of a Pandita. We are focusing on the first part, which lays out the 10 modes of being. In this section, we're looking at the third mode of being, following the aggregates and the dhatus, and this third mode of being is called the Ayatanas. In this section on the Ayatanas, we've covered the general presentation, and we're currently looking at the detailed explanation. This detailed explanation is a presentation of classification of designations that come from the last two dhatus and ayatanas, the mental ayatana and the mental object ayatana. In this detailed explanation, there are two parts. We looked at the first part, which is a general presentation where it was explained how mental consciousness creates designations. And now we're looking at the second part, the specific explanation, which is a list of the most important designations. There are 12 designations. We covered the first 5, conceptual and non-conceptual. The second is the difference between the object of non-conceptual knowledge and the object of conceptual knowledge. And the third, division and inclusion. The fourth, genre and type. And the fifth, substantial existence and mentally constructed existence. Now we come to the sixth which is engagement by way of appearance and engagement by way of exclusion. Within this 6th point, we looked at engagement by way of appearance. We didn't have the time to go over engagement by way of exclusion. We saw that engagement by way of appearance involves non-conceptual knowledge, consciousness. Non-conceptual knowledge engages towards substantial phenomena by way of their appearance. That was the sentence in the root text. Now we'll look at engagement by way of exclusion, which involves conceptual knowledge. Here, the root text says, conceptual knowledge completely excludes other phenomena that are not this object. Therefore, it engages by exclusion toward mental constructions by way of other exclusion, elimination, or other opposition or isolation. Such mental constructions are called isolated phenomena. This translation is out of date. If you have the paper version, update opposite with isolated. So we've covered non-conceptual knowledge. Now we're looking at conceptual knowledge. When conceptual knowledge engages toward an object, how does it engage toward this object? It won't be able to engage by way of appearance in the way that non-conceptual knowledge does. The object that appears is the specific object. It is momentary. Consciousness, knowledge that knows this is non-conceptual. We saw this yesterday. Then, what is the mode of engagement of conceptual knowledge? It occurs by way of exclusion. It's said that conceptual knowledge engages with or toward the object by excluding all that is not this object. When conceptual knowledge engages with an object, it proceeds by way of the exclusion of everything that is not the object. Conceptual knowledge cannot focus on multiple things at one time. It can only focus on a single thing at once. When we think, this is a bottle. The bottle that appears to conceptual knowledge cannot be the specific object. What appears to conceptual knowledge is the generic object, a mental image of the object in question, as we saw yesterday. Indeed, when we look at this bottle, conceptual knowledge cannot access the individual particles that are gathered together to make up what we call the bottle. And because we cannot see this, we cannot see the specific object. Furthermore, the specific object is momentary. The moment of its birth is the moment of its destruction. Can we perceive this? No, we cannot. Our conceptual knowledge can't do this. Conceptual knowledge does not interact with the specific object, but rather with the generic object. Non-conceptual knowledge is what interacts with the specific or concrete object. But conceptual knowledge does not do this. It interacts with the generic object. It cannot interact with the specific object. What is the process here? When we think this is a bottle, then we have excluded everything that is not a bottle. So the conceptual object is established based on mental exclusion. By excluding everything that is other than or not the bottle, then mind grasps the bottle and thinks that it knows the object. Conceptual knowledge has excluded all other objects around it, and it thinks that this object is a bottle. It doesn't think that it's a computer or a book, etc. This process of exclusion allows it to identify its object. Conceptual knowledge excludes all other knowledge from its field of knowledge, and then it names the object. It attaches a name to it. In this case, the word bottle. Conceptual knowledge then thinks that it has obtained certainty in relation to the object that it is interacting with. This is a type of mistaken knowledge because, in fact, there is no bottle. There's just a mass of particles that are in constant movement. But conceptual knowledge does not know this. It doesn't see this mass of particles that are in constant movement. It thinks that there is a bottle, which lasts over time. And conceptual knowledge is certain that this bottle is real. And this way of knowing objects occurs due to confused latent imprints that are present in the mind. And these confused latent imprints are latent imprints in relation to grasping. It's okay for engagement by way of exclusion. Okay, Barbara will continue. We will see that there are two different ways of explaining this exclusion. There is the way of the earlier scholars and those of the later scholars. Khenpo Chödrak Rinpoche begins by giving some historical context of Buddhist theory of knowledge to help us understand these two points of view. In ancient India, before the arrival of Buddha Shakyamuni, theory of knowledge existed within the context of Hindu schools of thought. When the Buddha taught, he didn't state or lay out a Buddhist reference text concerning exact knowledge. The Buddha himself didn't state or speak what would become a reference text, as he did on the topic of the Vinaya. Nevertheless, however, it seems that all of his words are founded on this basis, the basis of a theory of exact knowledge. And why is this, or how can we come to this conclusion? As we saw yesterday, the Buddha said that we should not trust in his words because he stated them, but rather to examine and analyze them until arriving at a certainty about what was said. So if we consider this statement, affirmation, we can see that the Buddha stated many types of logic and reasoning. He gave means by which one can establish that what he taught is indeed valid and exact. Following the Buddha's parinirvana, the Buddhist masters Dignaga and Dharmakirti, who lived in the 4th and 5th centuries respectively, they preserved the continuity of this mode of being, of reasoning, in relation to the Buddha's words, and they wrote reference texts on exact knowledge, which became a specifically Buddhist subject, and their treatises are still studied today. So in ancient India, following the Buddha's nirvana, after he reached nirvana, there were a lot of schools of thought with different topics and teachings. There were a lot of debates concerning these different schools of thought. However, these different schools of thought were not looking to destroy each other. They decided to organize a gathering with the representatives of the different schools of thought so that they could debate until they could determine who was correct. The representatives of these different schools of thought were meant to use reasoning in order to prove that what they taught was exact. It was said that an authentic master, whether they were Buddhist or Hindu, does not debate based on afflictive obscurations. They do not debate based on attachment or aversion. They debate because they are looking for the truth. Therefore, they always agree to admitting that their thought, their approach is not correct if one can show them this by way of reasoning. And that's why these debates were possible at that time. And these conflicts could be resolved due to debate. So this custom was supported by the government throughout India. For example, at the Buddhist University of Nalanda, it was a very large Buddhist university, and every day between 50 and 100 representatives of different Hindu traditions came to debate with Buddhist masters there, each to show that their view is correct. This tradition of debate was the norm over the course of thousands of years in India. Then, in the 8th and 9th century, Muslims began to invade certain parts of ancient India, what is contemporary Afghanistan. And that was the first time that a tradition used war as the means of resolving religious disputes. But previous to this, in India, debate was the means that was used. So before the debate took place, those who were to debate agreed that the loser would convert to the winner's religion. Yes, that's how it goes when you're looking for the truth. For example, the Indian Buddhist master Dharmakirti, who was known for his great intelligence and very precise knowledge, based on his knowledge and intelligence, he debated hundreds of thousands of masters. His knowledge was such that he never lost a single debate. Due to his efforts, hundreds of thousands of masters from Hindu traditions, as well as their disciples, converted to Buddhism. The teachings of Buddhist theory of knowledge were introduced in Tibet by the Indian master Shantarakshita in the 9th century. 200 years later, this subject was extremely well known in Tibet. At that time, the Tibetan translator Lodin Sherab of the Nyok family This Tibetan translator, Lodin Sherab, went to Kashmir, where numerous Buddhist Panditas lived. Over the course of 20 years, he studied all of the Buddhist subjects, and particularly Tsema, the Buddhist theory of knowledge. And when he returned to Tibet, he founded one of the largest Buddhist universities and translated the treatises of Dignaga and Dharmakirti on Tsema into Tibetan. The Tibetan khenpos of this period, who studied at this university, are known as the first scholars or the early scholars. And these scholars followed the point of view of Lodin Sherab on this subject. Later on, in the 13th century, the Kashmiri Pandita, Shakya Sri Bhadra, came to Tibet. And along with the master, Sakya Pandita, who was an expert in Sanskrit, they revised Lodin Sherab's translations. Notably, the text known as the Pramana Vartika by Dharmakirti, which lays out Tsema in detail. And this was the beginning of the later school of Buddhist theory of knowledge. It is stated that there are no major differences in the point of view between the first scholars and the later scholars, but there are nevertheless some differences. Sakya Pandita lived during the 13th century, and at this time, in most of ancient India, and because the Muslim invasion had not yet reached the whole of the country, there were still places where religious disputes were resolved based on debating. There was a Hindu scholar by the name of Rangpal and 6 other Hindu masters who wrote to Sakya Buddhist institutes in Tibet to say that they wanted to come and debate with them to prove that the Hindu schools of thought that they represented were superior to Buddhism. And at the same time, they wanted to try to convert the Tibetans to Hinduism. It seems they primarily addressed their request to Sakya Pandita. So Sakya Pandita organized a debate in India, not in Tibet because the climate and landscape were somewhat difficult in Tibet. So they organized the debate in a region, a border region of Nepal. The debate lasted for several months, and the Sakya Pandita won the debate. So the 6 Hindu masters accepted defeat and converted to Buddhism. However, Rangpal was very angry. Due to his miraculous powers, he flew into the sky and disappeared. But in fact, Sakya Pandita brought him back. He used the power of samadhi to bring back Rangpal so that he could convert, as this is what was agreed upon. And later on, Rangpal became a great Buddhist scholar. At the time, Hindu masters had very long hair, often quite tangled, And when Rangpal converted to Buddhism and became a Buddhist monk, his head was shaved. Apparently, at the primary seat of the Sakya school in Tibet, Rangpal's hair is still visible in the main temple where Sakya Pandita had tied them to a pillar. At that time, when there were religious disputes, the rule was that these disputes were resolved with the method of debate. Violent methods were not accepted by the people of ancient India. In his treatise, The Entry to the State of a Pandita, Mipham Rinpoche presents the point of view of the early scholars, surely because he studied Buddhist theory of knowledge at Ganden Monastery, which was a Gelug institute, and the Gelug school focuses a great deal on the point of view of the early scholars. There is perhaps another reason, which is that the majority of specialists on this subject, both in ancient India and in ancient Tibet, thought that in order to explain the various functioning of mind, the best system was that of the Sautrantika school. And the point of view of the Sautrantika school is that of the early scholars. The Sautrantika school, we talked about it yesterday, it explains that outer objects have a certain reality because the subtle particles of matter that make it up are indivisible. However, mind cannot come into direct contact with these objects. As we saw, mind and matter are opposite. Therefore, mind knows these particles based on a mental image. According to the majority of specialists on this subject, this is apparently the best way of explaining how mind knows the different objects. By continuing to maintain that there is an outer reality. There are other schools of thought that think differently, but apparently with this point of view that maintains an outer reality, the Sautrantika school of thought is the best way of explaining this subject. According to the Gelugpa, Dharmakirti's teachings, the early scholars on Buddhist theory of knowledge are based on the Sautrantika school. Sakya Pandita, of the later scholars, as for him, explains these cognitive processes in the context of the Siddhamatra school. And elsewhere, the seventh Karmapa, Chödrak Rinpoche, bases his explanation on the Shentong school, which is one of the branches of the Madhyamaka school of thought. He wrote a 200-page commentary of Dharmakirti's Pramanavartika. The seventh Karmapa said that he wrote the commentary because he remembered that in one of his previous lives he had been Dharmakirti. When he wrote his commentary, he had a secretary, which was fairly common at the time, a secretary who wrote down what the master said, and the secretary had to be extremely well learned in order to follow and write down what the master wrote. The secretary of the Karmapa at this time was a great scholar by the name of Karma Chinlipa. Sometimes Karmapa stated certain points of view that contradicted the first scholars. And so Karma Chinlipa debated with the Karmapa about what was said, and sometimes the Karmapa said, no, when I was in the form of Dharmakirti, the view that I adopted was like this. And then he explained the view. So according to the seventh Karmapa, the teachings of Buddhist theory of knowledge need to be explained in the context of the Shentong Madhyamaka school. When we find differences in the points of view that are stated by various Buddhist masters on different subjects, it's necessary not to think that one point of view goes against another point of view or cancels another one out. In fact, each point of view is correct because each point of view is explained based on a particular system. Certain masters believe that certain systems are better to explain a certain subject, and this is why there are these differences. If we consider the debates that were mentioned, where the masters debated on these subtle points of difference among the Buddhist teaching, they engage in these debates in order to keep the teachings, the doctrine, pure, so that mistaken viewpoints didn't slip into the teaching. It's important not to accept a point of view simply because it was stated by a Buddhist. It may be that this person's view is not exact. And when someone states an inexact point of view, then this is a flaw that has been added to the Buddha's teachings and doctrine, and it damages it. So if we practice on a mistaken point of view, the result will be inexact and we won't attain the state of Buddhahood. This is why debate is important. Debate allows for determining the most exact point of view and eliminating incorrect points of view. Buddhist theory of knowledge is a key that allows for understanding Buddhist philosophy and its points of view. So this concludes the historical context of Tsema. And as a reminder, Khenpo Rinpoche gave us this context in order to help us understand what will be explained next, which is the 2 points of view concerning engagement by way of exclusion. Now we can take a short silent break. So we're continuing with the sixth point that explains engagement by way of appearance and engagement by way of exclusion. We covered engagement by way of appearance, and there was a general explanation of engagement by way of exclusion. So now there are further details that are given concerning engagement by way of exclusion. And this will involve the first scholars and the later scholars who were mentioned in the history that Khenpo shared concerning Tsema. It said in the text there are two other exclusions. Other exclusion concerning a specific object due to the object possessing a nature that is distinct from others. Other exclusion concerning cognition, as cognition grasps in conformity with other exclusion of a specific object. Through the power of this exclusion or elimination, that which is other than the vase is eliminated. The vase as such then arises. On the basis of the vase, several isolated phenomena are distinguished. Conditioned to the isolation of the unconditioned, impermanent due to the isolation of impermanent, etc. Thus, classifications are established. As it was said in the history of Tsema that Barbara told us about, we find two schools in the Buddhist theory of knowledge, the first scholars and the later scholars. Their points of view diverge concerning other exclusion. As it was said, Mipham Rinpoche based his explanations on the first scholars. According to the first scholars, this other exclusion has two aspects. The functioning of conceptual knowledge and the specific function of the object itself. What is the function of the object that allows for excluding other objects? Here, Khenpo uses the example of a wood fire. He explained that a wood fire is a mass of particles, and their specific function is to be hot and burning. What the first scholars say is that each object naturally excludes other objects and does not mix with them, like fire and water. If we pour water on fire, we won't get something that's half fire and half water. We won't have water with fire. Either the water will exclude the fire or the fire will exclude the water. And the same goes for if we consider this bottle that is on the table. They are two individual things. When we say that they mutually exclude each other, this means that they don't fuse together. They each have their own function. the table remains the table and the bottle remains the bottle. These things don't become a jumbled up mass or some kind of soup mixed together. At the location where the bottle is, the bottle excludes the table, because where the bottle is, the table is not. At the precise location of the bottle, there is not table. And so the first scholars say the bottle excludes the table. According to the first scholars, this natural exclusion is a characteristic of the object, and it brings about the exclusion that then occurs for conceptual knowledge. Sakya Pandita, who is among the later scholars, does not agree with this. He says that the nature of a thing is simply its nature. It is what it is. The object does not accomplish the function of excluding anything else. Sakya Pandita says that the act of exclusion is simply a function of mind. However, concerning exclusion in terms of mind, on this level, all of the scholars agree. The first scholars and the later scholars agree. There's no difference between these two groups concerning exclusion in terms of mind. So this explanation goes for both groups. What they explain in terms of exclusion of mind is that when an individual encounters a vase, the presence of the object is recorded non-conceptually. Then, conceptual knowledge occurs, is produced, and conceptual knowledge sees the generic object of the outer object to which it attaches the word vase. When it sees and it names this generic object, conceptual knowledge focuses on this thing, and all other things are excluded from mind. Conceptual knowledge thinks vase, and it doesn't think glasses. The act of excluding is not something intentional. It occurs automatically by naming the thing. At the moment when mind names a thing, it connects solely with this thing. It cannot do anything beyond this. If we understand the way that conceptual mind functions, when it focuses on an object by excluding others, there will be great benefit in our practice of meditation. Indeed, the goal of meditation is to liberate ourselves from the samsaric functioning of mind. Understanding these details concerning samsaric mind and conceptual mind is of great benefit for liberating ourselves from this functioning. It's helpful to know this functioning in order to free ourselves from it. If we don't know what it is, how can we free ourselves from it? Here, Khenpo quotes a Sakya Mahasiddha, a realized master of the Tibetan Buddhist school, the Sakya school. This master was named Nawang Chenpen Ningpo. He said that every day he contemplated a stanza of a text written by Sakya Pandita in which he lays out Buddhist theory of knowledge. Nawang Chenpen Ningpo said that he found this extremely beneficial for progressing in his meditative practice, and he advised his disciples to do so as well. Someone asked Khenpo a question. Can mind know several objects at the same time? Khenpo answered that conceptual knowledge knows one object after another. We can't think about a flower pot and the statue over there at the same time. We saw this when we considered other exclusion in terms of conceptual knowledge. Conceptual knowledge knows an object by excluding all other objects. So when I think flower pot, I don't think statue. Conceptual knowledge, therefore, can only know one object after another. First, I'll think flower pot, then I'll think statue. I can't think both at the same time. However, there can be a progression that's so fast that we think that it's happening at the same time. For example, there are some images to illustrate this. You're going to have to imagine it because I don't have the material at hand. If I hold a torch in my hand and I spin it around, we'll see a circle of fire. But, of course, there is no circle. It's simply an impression produced because I'm spinning the torch very fast. And similarly, when we use a hammer to hit a nail through a pile of paper, if we hit the nail through a stack of 100 sheets of paper at once, we may think that the nail is piercing the stack of paper all at once, but of course this is not true. It goes through each sheet of paper one after the other. So this is the same way that conceptual knowledge functions. It knows one object after another. But it can know things very quickly, and we may have the impression that we know them at the same time. Just like when we hammer a nail through a stack of paper, we may think that the nail goes through the stack all at once, but of course it's piercing each sheet of paper one after another. Likewise, we may think that we know objects all at once, but in fact conceptual knowledge knows them one after another. However, sense knowledge can know several objects at the same time. For example, when we're driving, we can hear the radio and see the road at the same time. But we'll only conceptualize one object at a time. Here we're talking about the functioning of ordinary beings who are imprisoned within dualistic perception, which limits our ability to know. Someone who is not limited by this functioning has much vaster knowledge. On the path of seeing, which is the path where a practitioner attains realization of emptiness, at this point, mind is capable of manifesting 100 manifestations in a fraction of a second. It can also travel to 100 Pure Lands in a fraction of a second. When a practitioner, a bodhisattva, attains the path of seeing, the first bodhisattva ground, this is the first ground of enlightenment, and there are 9 more before reaching the state of Buddhahood. And when a bodhisattva goes from one level to the next, their ability and their knowledge or no, the ability of their knowledge is greater and greater, and they acquire extraordinary qualities. This concludes the sixth classification of designations: engagement by way of appearance and engagement by way of exclusion. Do you have questions about what we have shared? I'm not sure, maybe I wasn't attentive enough, but if I try to sum up, sense consciousness multiple sense consciousnesses can arrive simultaneously. The example that you gave about driving, I can see the road, I can hear the radio. And mental, conceptual consciousness, it can only focus on one object at a time. So the question that comes up for me is concerning non-conceptual mental consciousness. If there are multiple sense consciousnesses that arise at the same time, can non-conceptual mental consciousness directly perceive what's happening of all of the sense consciousnesses? Is my question clear? Khenpo didn't explain this subject in relation to non-conceptual mental knowledge. He talked about sense consciousness. According to what was explained, we could imagine that this is the case. He explained that conceptual knowledge that functions by way of exclusion, but not non-conceptual knowledge in terms of mental consciousness. What was said is that non-conceptual knowledge of mental consciousness is produced at the same time as sense consciousness. What I'd say, though I'm not 100% sure, is that yes, when we will drive, hear the radio, and see the road, there is surely a moment of non-conceptual mental consciousness that is produced. That's produced at the same time as this sense consciousness. So there could be several, I imagine. But once it's conceptualized, there's just one thought at a time. That's what I would say, logically, but I'm not sure. I'd like to come back to the acquisition of knowledge. Conceptual knowledge, as you said, grasps particles of non-conceptual knowledge, and then it associates this with a family of objects. Okay, but a baby, for example, we present objects to it and he doesn't know what they are. There's no family of objects to rely on. This new conceptual knowledge. So how does this work for the acquisition of knowledge? Could be for a baby, but it could also be for us. If someone shows us an object we've never seen before, if someone shows me something that I've never seen before, I won't have any way of classifying it. So you're talking about the acquisition of knowledge. If we don't know the name of an object, how do we conceptualize it? Indeed, in terms of babies, this is explained in the chapter on the aggregates. It's said that they don't have the possibility of distinguishing between things in terms of the full meaning of the term distinction, because they don't have the meaning. But this doesn't mean that they don't have any concepts. Even though they won't attach a word to something, there is still conceptual knowledge, just without this phase of naming. The fact that there are no names doesn't mean that their knowledge is non-conceptual. And then concerning adults who have received an education, then of course we can ascribe words to things. And of course, if we see something we've never seen before, we won't put a word, and then someone will tell us the name and we'll put a word to it. Is there an iteration concerning how we understand things according to different families of objects? For example, we won't necessarily know the right object or the right family to begin with, and we'll look for how to classify it. I didn't follow your question. What I mean is that there are times that we think we know an object, but it's not what we think it is, so there's some kind of iteration about where I'll classify an object. How does this work in terms of conceptual knowledge? Is it a process that goes beyond this? Khenpo didn't go into these details. I'm not going to state anything on that. I'd like to know if I understood correctly. Non-conceptual knowledge serves as a recipient for all sense knowledge and then transmits this to conceptual knowledge. You mean mental non-conceptual knowledge? Not knowledge, consciousness. Non-conceptual consciousness is a recipient for what sense consciousness can transmit, and it transmits it to conceptual consciousness. Sense consciousness knows specific objects. There is a moment of visual consciousness, for example, that knows a visual form, the specific object, which is a visual form. What Khenpo explained is that at the same time, there is a moment of non-conceptual mental consciousness that is produced and also knows this visual form. And the following moment, then there is conceptual mental knowledge. Conceptual mental consciousness is no longer connected to the specific object, but rather with a mental image, a generic object. It will know this by excluding all other objects. Is it clearer? It seems that the non-conceptual knowledge is just a recipient for... No, it's not a recipient. What Khenpo explains is that non-conceptual mental knowledge, consciousness, knows the specific object. Like non-conceptual sense knowledge, at the same time, it also knows the specific object. It's not a recipient. Non-conceptual mental consciousness knows the object. But I don't see the point of it. What's the point of non-conceptual consciousness? Mental one. It doesn't have anything more than sense consciousness. It's a way of explaining the functioning of mind. Khenpo explained this at another point, that it's not necessarily the way that things function on an absolute level, but it's a model that allows us to understand how things function on a relative level. But we won't necessarily be able to see it under a microscope, at least that's what I understood. It's a way of explaining things that allows for having a better grasp on how mind functions. Why is it like this, and what's the point? Well, this shows that there are two ways of knowing that I think corresponds well with reality. There is sense consciousness that knows a specific object. Visual consciousness knows a specific object, for example. And then there's a whole other treatment of information, we could say, that occurs. And in terms of conceptual mental consciousness, there's no longer any connection with a specific object. And so this model allows us to understand how we move from one to another. Of course, there are also various ways of explaining it. There are different models, but all of these models show the way that we move from one to another. Though there is always a moment where we ask ourselves, oh, how does this work? And I have questions about it too. Even studying this subject, we've been studying this subject for a while here, and we still have questions. But in any case, it shows that we are in this conceptual knowledge all the time, and we're no longer connected with the object itself at all. We're relating to generic objects which are not at all related to what sense knowledge knows. That's the important thing to retain as far as I've understood. And there are these models that are explained. It's difficult for us to apprehend them as ordinary beings. That was explained. We're limited due to our ability to perceive things. We have a hard time grasping how it actually functions. I have a question about visualization and conceptual or non-conceptual knowledge. Visualization in practice. Is it conceptual or non-conceptual? What I would like for this to be clear. These explanations, I would like to be able to apply this to practice. What is it for? How do I represent this for myself? I would say that this is a perfect question to ask Ju Mipham Rinpoche tomorrow. Thank you. At a certain point, you said that Sema is the key, and then I don't have the rest. So it's a key, but what's the other? What's the other half of the sentence? It is the key that allows for understanding Buddhist philosophy and its points of view. Thank you. There's another question here, and if we have time, there is a little story we can share about debates. I was wondering, can we say that conceptual consciousness is the vector or the reflection of karma? I'm not entirely certain what the last word was, sorry. We'll find out. Khenpo didn't say anything about that. It could be a good question to ask Rinpoche tomorrow as well. Actually, he did talk about it a little bit. He said that conceptual knowledge comes from our confused latent imprints. Latent imprints are what is produced by actions. Karma is actions. So indeed, everything that we conceptualize is related to actions carried out. Yes. It's kind of a snowball effect based on concepts. Then we'll find some things important, others not. We'll like some things, we'll reject others, and then based on this, we'll accomplish actions, develop afflictive obscurations that will lead to accomplishing virtuous or non-virtuous actions, and create further imprints in the mind stream. You want to hear the story? It is the story of a debate to illustrate what we talked about earlier concerning how religious problems were resolved by way of debating. Khenpo shared the story of a debate between Aryadeva and Ashvaghosha. They were two very well-known masters. Aryadeva was a disciple of Nagarjuna, and Ashvaghosha was a Hindu master. Ashvaghosha's mother was Buddhist, and his father was a Hindu master and scholar. They lived in Western India, and his father taught his son his religion. Ashvaghosha became a very convinced Hindu. When he was 15 or 16 years old, he realized that there was no meaning to wealth, so he renounced his family heritage. They were very, very wealthy, and he spent his life spreading Hinduism. He studied and contemplated and saw that this was not sufficient. For many years he meditated on the god Shiva, and in the end he encountered Shiva, met Shiva, who conferred the city of speech on him and said, "During debates I will come, I will enter into your mind, and therefore no one will be able to beat you, because I will speak through you." Due to this, hundreds of Buddhist monasteries converted to Hinduism. Young Ashvaghosha said to his mother that he was an all-powerful victor. His mother said to him, "No, not really. You have succeeded in the western part of the country, but not in the central part. I don't think that you'll succeed at Nalanda Institute. You should go and see what happens." Young Ashvaghosha went to Nalanda thinking that he would also be capable of victory there. Many of Nalanda's Panditas knew Ashvaghosha's reputation, and they were afraid of losing. Not because of their points of view, but due to their ability in debate. They concluded that the best would be to invite Nagarjuna, who lived in the south. But he was very far from Nalanda, and it would be hard. There wasn't time for him to come. So all of Nalanda's Panditas carried out Mahakala ritual in the main temple of Nalanda. A black crow came out of the heart of Mahakala's statue in the temple. They wrote a letter to Nagarjuna, attached it to the crow's neck, and it flew off to carry it to Nagarjuna. It's important to know that at this point in time, Nagarjuna was about 400 years old, even a little older. Aryadeva was worried and thought that the voyage would be too much for him. And so he offered to go in his stead. Nagarjuna said to him, "First, we must see if you are capable to win this debate. So first you and I will debate, and we'll see if you can win. I will be the Hindu master, and you will debate with me." Over the course of several days, they debated, and Nagarjuna lost the debate. Aryadeva was quite surprised. He even thought, "Oh, maybe he's Hindu and not Buddhist." In fact, at the end of the debate, Aryadeva made the traditional gesture, but with some disdain for his master. And Nagarjuna said to him, "You will win the debate, but you will have many problems on your way due to your lack of respect for me. When these difficulties will arise, place your mind on emptiness and in this way you will overcome the obstacles. Then you will attain the path of seeing. Of course, Nagarjuna could have flown quickly to Nalanda, but he knew that if he let Aryadeva go, he would win the debate and he would attain the path of seeing on the way. And if he did not do this, he would not have attained the path of seeing. So Nagarjuna also sent Aryadeva for his own benefit. On the way, Aryadeva encountered a practitioner of Hindu Tantra who was preparing a ritual for which it was necessary to burn a Buddhist Pandita's eye. The Hindu practitioner saw Aryadeva and asked for his eye. A bodhisattva is supposed to be capable, out of generosity, of giving what one asks of them. And so Aryadeva agreed and offered his eye. During the operation, he placed his mind on emptiness and attained the path of seeing. And he was able to overcome the obstacle, which was that of not acting for egotistical reasons. Then he continued on his path, on his way to Nalanda. Ashvaghosha had already arrived in Nalanda and had gained the king's sympathy. He asked the king to close Nalanda Institute because he was afraid that Nagarjuna was invited and would come. No one was able to enter. But the Panditas understood that Aryadeva was outside somewhere, so they sent a monk to go out and collect water. Aryadeva and the monk changed clothes, and Aryadeva was able to enter the institute disguised in this way. Ashvaghosha was in the institute, and every day he went to ask the Panditas if there was someone who wanted to debate. One day he knocked on Aryadeva's door and said, "Who are you?" Ashvaghosha said, "First, tell me who you are. At first glance, you seem to be one-eyed." Aryadeva replied, "Why did you mention that? Your god, Indra, has 1,000 eyes, but he has not yet seen emptiness. So what is the point of all these eyes? Shiva has 3 eyes, and he also hasn't seen the true nature of reality. So this has no importance. I may have only 1 eye, but I have seen the true nature of existence." Ashvaghosha didn't say anything back. All Hindu masters have to bathe in the Ganges every day, and if they are in a region where the Ganges doesn't flow, water is brought to them each day wherever they are. Ashvaghosha had thousands of disciples, and they brought him water from the Ganges every day at Nalanda to bathe. Knowing this, Aryadeva filled a recipient with urine and excrement, and he sat next to the place where Ashvaghosha is bathing, and he began shaking around the recipient. Ashvaghosha asked him, "What is the point of shaking up this recipient filled with urine and excrement?" Aryadeva replied, "What is the purpose of bathing in the water of the Ganges? In your mind, there's so much sin and non-virtue. You cannot wash that away by pouring the water of the Ganges over your body. Ashvaghosha then said to him, "You always have a counter-argument for everything. Maybe we can debate." Aryadeva said, "Okay." So the king was invited. A committee of Buddhist and Hindu scholars was gathered to judge, and the debate took place. The king sponsored this kind of debate at the time. It wasn't very expensive. People came by foot. They just ate rice and lentils. At this time, the Indian government, and also in other parts of the world, religion was very important. Not like today. And so for the first week, everyone could follow the debate. And during the second week, only the high-level Panditas were able to follow the debate. And during the third week, the debate was even beyond the ability of all those who were present. But at the end of the week, Ashvaghosha lost the debate, and according to custom, he offered a garland of flowers to Aryadeva. And so the committee of scholars who judges debates determined who had won. Concerning debates with remarkable masters like Dharmakirti and Aryadeva, it is difficult to judge whether the knowledge of one master is greater than their adversary or not, because their knowledge is vaster than the scholars of the committee. And so the decision occurs between the two adversaries. Ashvaghosha then became a disciple of Aryadeva. He wrote texts on many subjects, but he is especially well known for his texts concerning the life of Buddha Shakyamuni and his enlightenment, taking refuge in the Three Jewels, the practice of abandoning 10 non-virtuous actions and practicing the 10 virtuous actions. Furthermore, he became one of the abbots of Nalanda. Apparently, at the end of his life, he opened one of his veins and he wrote an aspiration prayer with his blood in 70 stanzas, and then he let a tigress drink his blood, eat his flesh. So this is how the debates took place at the time. And we'll see you in December in order to continue the Ayatanas. And there is a Clarity and Compassion course in August, but there won't be a presentation of the text. In August, there's Qigong with Tsulchim Namdak. Sanamji tamche sepani tomye nepe tronam famche ne kekana chi balak trupai sibe sore chowa shu chida kenpa dong kundu zombo de yon de shinde de da kengi jesu dalo chi yawadita tamche raptu Gikusoni Chenatong Cheni Mingyur and Pe Chenatong Kenen Miche and Pe Chenaki Chitang Wamanandru Parshu. Thank you. Goodbye.